Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierre, alongside my good co-host Dylan, and making his return for I think this is the fifth year in a row now. Ben Pope, how's it going, Ben? My internet
Great.
glitching
Yeah.
again.
Thanks for having me back. It's a fun little springtime tradition.
Yes, the first time we had you on, I think it was summer of 2020, right before the bubble was happening. A lot has changed since then, and then the last time we had you on last year, that was when right as the season had ended, but we didn't know that the Blackhawks were going to draft first overall. So even in the past year, so much has happened, and we did catch you at the draft in Nashville, which was nice. But again, another season gone, another not very good season. But I think this is what Blackhawks management wanted. Um, Starting off the year, there was so much hype with Connor Bedard, and it kind of lived up to that. Well, he did live up to that, but the team was watchable for the first, it felt like, month. But once we hit December, January, February, it seems like that every year. It's so hard to watch hockey, especially when the team is not that great. It just games aren't fun at all. And then losing Connor Bedard in January was not fun. But once it kind of got towards close to the trade deadline, March, April, it seemed like this team was a lot more watchable, especially being 500 in March. And overall, it was a really rough season. There was a lot of growing pains, but at the end of the season, like Connor Bedard was fantastic. I mean, Alex Vlasic was such a big surprise how gigantic of a step he took this year. And there's so many more promising things. The Blackhawks have second overall pick, and I just wonder what was it like covering the Blackhawks this year and how it was different to previous years, if at all.
Um. Well, I mean, certainly Bedard was a big factor. Having him to write about, and just, I mean, every time I wrote about him, it would get several times more reads than if I wrote about anyone else. So, feeling like I wanted to try to maximize my coverage of him, but also combined with the fact that he's not really the most open or like talkative guy in the locker room, and also kind of hard to get one on one just because there is so much attention on him.
Mm-hmm.
That was an interesting twist from just like a reporting standpoint, to have like your prime subject be maybe not someone you're going to get a lot of compelling quotes from. So um, fortunately, he did a lot on the ice that it was easy to write about and to analyze, and to talk about that. But that was certainly a different twist. And other than him, I felt like the team was pretty enjoyable to talk to, and like a pretty good mood. And there's a lot of guys in this room who are really smart and good interviews, but just maybe not players for the most part that a lot of fans care about that much. So just kind of balancing that, and how much to write about Bedard versus how much to write about um, somebody else. Although I will give credit that Vlasic, who is certainly an important piece, is also easy to talk to. So he has a combination of both. But yeah, I guess that's my takeaway from this year. But otherwise, nothing too out of the ordinary compared to the past years when we've talked after the season. It'd be nice to get to cover some meaningful games down the stretch and some playoffs at some point, but I think we're gonna have to wait a few more years for that.
Yeah, I I tend to agree with that. Like, I think at least once a month I would see tweets from like y'all and Powers and Lazarus where they would play like a Colorado or a Dallas or something, and it's just like you really realize how far this team is from being one of these teams that's the final eight in the playoffs right now. Like that, they're just a long way from that, and that's just the reality. Um, I guess that kind of does lead into one of the questions I had because obviously, I think the Blackhawks are sitting at like 30 something million in cap going into the offseason. Um, I don't expect them to like throw $12 million at Sam Reinhart or something, but as a fan base, what should we be? How close to whether it's the floor or the ceiling do you think Davidson's going to be playing with the salary cap this offseason?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to say, because I think as long as the contracts are 1 or 2 years, like as long as they expire before Bedard is due for his next contract in 2026, I think they're pretty much willing to spend a virtually unlimited amount. Like, I don't think they're really worried about the cap situation. I mean, we saw it with the extensions to Foligno, Mrazek, and Dickinson, all got in that 4 to 5 million range, um, which is probably over market value for all three of them. And I think they're going to be happy to give out as many contracts like that as guys are willing to take. Talking to Kyle just on Friday, actually, his big thing is he wants to have a deeper team next year. Like he's talked about wanting to take the next step, and I think we all realize that that's not like to be a bubble team. That's just to be maybe not a bottom 3 team, like just to get to 30 wins. Maybe I feel like would be an impressive season next year, considering what they're working with. But I think in order, the way he thinks the team can take that step is just by having a deeper lineup. Like, yeah, he's not going to be going out and signing someone like Reinhardt or Jake Gensel or trading for Mitch Marner, because those are guys that are going to want long contracts past 2026, and they're just not really willing to make that commitment right now. But I think they are going to try to bring in a top 6 forward and another top 4 defenseman and some other guys who are, solid players who can contribute, because they're willing to give out those $4 or $5 million contracts to anyone who is really willing to take a 1 or 2 year deal. So I think we'll see them be somewhat active this summer. It's just not going to be the big splashes, and it's not going to really like transform the team. But I think they will try to have maybe a bit more complete lineup, so we're not seeing guys like Reese Johnson and Mackenzie Entwistle and Jacob Megna and Jarrett Tenorti, like guys on that tier. I think the idea is for maybe them to not be in the lineup, but I don't know if the top of the lineup is going to change that much.
Yeah, can't tell you how sick I got of Kevin Korchinski's number 1 D partner being Jacob Megna this year. And it's nothing against Jacob Megna. Like, I'm sure he's a great person, but that's not the defenseman Korchinski needs on his wing to develop, or on his, right side to develop.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I completely agree. I think top 6, top 4, like one of each is a necessity this offseason. And whether it's, I'm not going to name names, but there's guys that are good. They're going to be guys out there to be got, whether it's a Taylor Hall route where someone's looking to cap dump again. I think the Hawks would be all over that. Or, like you said, they have the luxury of being able to pay some of these guys $5-6 million for 2 years when they're probably worth $4 on the market. Like it's an interesting spot to be in for sure. And with the way Davidson views roster players, because I think the way he shops in free agency is akin to how he wants the roster to look. Like he's normally looking for speed, skill, at a fair price, obviously. Like I feel like the Domi and Athanasiou signings 2 years ago are a huge example of what he wants when he's looking at free agents like that. So there's going to be guys like that this offseason, and I'm very curious to see who this management group pencils in as, must gets this offseason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're looking at cap friendly and looking at the free agent list, like there are quite a lot of guys in that solid but not star tier. This isn't maybe the most exciting free agent class because there aren't a lot of stars, but there are a lot of guys in that like B tier range that are kind of what the Hawks are going to look for. So I feel like it honestly works out fairly well for their interest, and that they'll have a pretty wide selection of those kind of guys to look at.
For sure. I know Pierce is all on the Chris Tanev train. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Like Chris Tanev, I don't think they would ever be able to get Brett Pesce from Carolina. But yeah, there's so many names out there. I think getting a stabilizing partner from Kevin Korchinski would help so much. And then just looking at the forward end of things, I think them getting another center or a guy who can play wing as well, give them some more versatility, would help out. Like one guy I really want them to get, and I feel like they would want to go after him because he fits the mold that they want, is Chandler Stevenson, a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups, has that experience, and plays with a lot of speed, can play center or wing. And I feel if you can run a center core of Connor Bedard and Chandler Stevenson and Jason Dickinson, you can do a lot worse than that. And that allows guys like Frank Nazar to play the wing now and kind of insulate them a little bit. So yeah, there's even a couple of stars out there, like you mentioned, like Sam Reinhart, Jake Gensel, I think are legitimate first line wingers, but I don't think the Blackhawks are going to go after them, nor do I think they would be interesting in going to the Blackhawks. But there's definitely guys out there that can legitimately help their top 6 or top 4. And I didn't put this question on the list, but I think it's a good way to go to there. Like, do you think they go after another goalie? Because to me, the 3 most valuable players on this team this year were Connor Bedard, Alex Vlasic, and Peter Mrazek. It just seems like they gave those 3 players gave this team the chance to win more often than not. It's just that they didn't have the support there. And Arvid Soderblom, like, there were a few games they were like, okay, maybe he's turning a corner, maybe he'll, catch go on a hot streak here and finish off strong, but it never really happened that way. And what do you think about the Blackhawks going after another goalie, and like why did they think going into this year that Arvid Soderblom could be the number one goalie? Because so far there's not really much to complain about the Davidson regime, but that's one of the probably really the only thing where I'm like, okay, they thought this guy could be a starting goalie going in this year, and it just didn't work out that way.
Yeah, I mean, on that second point, like I kind of thought he could be a starting goalie too coming into the year. I don't think that was really an unreasonable expectation at all. He performed really well at every level he played at, and he hadn't been great in the NHL, but he'd had pretty limited sample size and pretty difficult situations. So I thought going into the year that he would probably start out as like a 1B to Mrazek, but I kind of expected that by December he might emerge as the 1A. So I don't think it was, the incorrect process by the Blackhawks to give him that opportunity. It just, as you said, it didn't work out. And along those lines, I don't think they've completely given up on him either. I think they think he has a lot of, natural talent, and he does have that track record of success at every other level. And they also really like that he's pretty even keel. It didn't seem like the fact he had one of the worst seasons of any goalie in the league really affected him mentally that much. And on one hand, maybe you want to see a guy have a little more self-awareness, but on the other hand, like it's a good thing that he has that confidence and that he is unflappable in that way. And so I think that they're not totally writing him off, and he has another year under contract, which works out well for him too. But I do think they're going to bring in another guy with NHL experience to compete for that second job with Mrazek to accompany with Soderblom to accompany Mrazek, because one of the big talking points that Davidson has said since the season ended is wanting more competition for roles next year, and thinking that if there's more competition, if there's more guys like for the fourth line forward, for example, pushing for that spot, then it'll elevate everyone. Like if Taylor Radish, wasn't just basically guaranteed a roster spot until the last few weeks, like maybe he would have scored. So it's not like Davidson's name dropped Radish in particular, but that's me ad-libbing there. But I think in terms of the competition front, the second goalie job is as good as an example as you're going to find of something where they think that if they can get another goalie, that gives you insurance if Soderblom it looks the same next year, but also it could push Soderblom to be better himself. So I do think they'll go get a guy. It'll just have to be a guy that is willing to come in, not entirely guaranteed a roster spot. So it's probably not going to be an established proven starter or anything. It could be another Alex Stalock type goalie, or maybe slightly above that. But I think they will probably make some move in that position just to give themselves more options depending on how things shake out next year.
For sure.
Yeah, I felt that was a little scathing of Soderblom there, but it was disappointing to see him this year because like there was reason for expectation, not to be like a elite starter, but to maybe at the very least, start a good tandem with Arvid Soderblom where, you can put him out there and he's not going to let you lose you every game. But it just felt like that he couldn't make the big save when he needed to. And I feel the biggest thing is they should have brought in maybe another guy, like, again, maybe not Alex Stalock, but a guy on Alex Stalock's level just to kind of bring in more competition. I hope they do that not only for goaltending, but for defensemen and forwards in the next year, just so, the players that make the team deserved it and don't make it just because, this team doesn't have enough depth and they kind of have to be there.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the main point.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, I don't have anything else to add to that.
No, I was just agreeing too.
Kind of same thing, same player who another player that had a disappointing year who we thought really was going to have a big year there was Lukas Reichel. And I wonder what your thoughts are on him, because signed a 2-year extension, and honestly, good for him. Like, you made over $1 million for the next couple of years. And like, worst case scenario, if it doesn't work for the Blackhawks, maybe they can just bury it or whatever. But What did you think about Lucas Reichel's season? Because it felt like a little bit of everything. Like he had bad luck, but it felt like he wasn't trying. Like everything, I feel like everything that went wrong with him went wrong, and then he went down to Rockford, did all right there too, and then came up and seemed to have like a bit of more, I guess, pep in his step, for lack of a better term. Like he looked more engaged out there, and I've said this. I mean, look at Alexi Lafreniere in the playoffs. This is a guy who went first overall in the same draft class as him, and granted, he has had better seasons than what Lucas Reichel has have. But it shows you that it takes a while for these guys are still so young. They're 21, 22 years old. It can take a while for these guys to break out, but at the same time, it's a delicate balance because you don't want to give these guys too much time, and if they don't, do anything, then like you could have traded them or whatever. So what did you think about Lucas Reichel's year this year, and what do you think about his future with this team, and if he can, finally live up to that, maybe that second line winger role, like I think a lot of us were expecting him to?
Yeah, it's kind of comparing his situation to Soderblom's. We saw him obviously struggle out of the gate as well, and I think the difference was that it really did impact his confidence and his psyche, and I think that's a big reason why it snowballed. I mean, they tried him at center at the start of the year, and that clearly didn't work. And I think if maybe he'd not gotten as shaken by that, moving him to wing could have solved the issue. But I think by the time they did that, like he was already kind of dipping confidence-wise, and it just snowballed more and more from there. And the thing was, the most encouraging part of his year was the last month after he came back from that stint in Rockford. I mean, he wasn't, dynamite or anything, but he did look significantly better. You look at his stats, and he made some slight improvements. Like he was getting a little bit more scoring chances, a little more shot attempts. He was producing a little bit more. And talking to him at the end of the year, he was pretty open about the fact that like he had to do some pretty significant soul searching to kind of rebuild his confidence and realize that everyone makes mistakes at this level. Even guys like Leon Draisaitl, who I know he's looked up to a lot, make mistakes. And the fact that you can't, let that affect you. You got to just move on from that. And I know a lot of NHLers talk about that, and it sounds cliche, just taking things one shift at a time. But I think that's been kind of difficult for Reichel to get to that point. And he finally does seem to have figured that out. And I think we saw that at the end of the year where not every game was great. Like he had some games where he was pretty quiet, but it didn't snowball into 3, 4, 5 games where he didn't do anything. Like he was able to bounce back and make some nice plays like we saw in that breakaway in the last game of the year in LA. So certainly it's a disappointing year. And like he paid the price in terms of his contract. He probably would have gotten several million more if he had the season we were expecting. But I think it's a good idea to give him 2 years. And that's something Kyle has said too, that they want to show a little bit of trust in him and not make him feel like, he's on the razor's edge of getting given up on, because when your confidence is fragile, that's not really helpful. So I think, we talk about some guys in their contract year, they go off, they're really motivated by that. But I think for Reichel not being in a contract year next year will probably help him. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that he will bounce back. I mean, as you said, he is really young. He's only going to turn, I think, 22 in a week or two, like sometime around now. And that is still a really young guy. And he's maybe even like the first few years after he was drafted, he really had to gain a lot of weight and strength. So he might even be functionally a little bit younger in terms of amount of years he's been at his full physical maturity compared to someone like Bedard. So yeah, I don't think there's any reason to give up on him, or there's probably reason to be concerned. I shouldn't say there's no reason to be concerned, but I think there's still a lot of reason to believe as well. So we'll see how things go next year.
For sure. And I think one thing with at least Reichel at the start of last season, what I remember is they were really trying to push him at center, and I just don't think he's an NHL centerman. And they finally get that now. Like, obviously, you have to try it to see if it works, but I'm not trying to say it's not the situation to try it in. But if you want to see if Reichel's a centerman, you probably shouldn't have 30-point wingers as his wingers. Like, you should probably give him a legitimate shot with good wingers. And I think he could be a middle six winger on this team still. I think he has the skill set. I think he has the skill. like you said, it is a confidence thing. Like that can be fixed in an offseason. I also think if there's got to be times where he just realizes he's the fastest guy on the ice, and I just don't think he realizes that sometimes. Like you said, that burst he had against LA at the end of last year, I think he's capable of doing that all the time. I just think he doesn't realize you could catch the defenseman off guard in a heartbeat with your speed, and if he could just like. If I'm the coaching staff, I kind of just want to glue Lucas Reichel to some Brandon Hagel tape. Not saying he needs to be Brandon Hagel, but like Hagel uses his speed as a weapon, and I think Reichel should use it as a weapon as well because it could lead to way more offense for him, and it could lead to him having a permanent role in this team going forward. Yeah, it may not be top 6 goal scoring winger or playmaking winger that we all or center that we all thought he could be, but if he could be a middle 6 contributor and make the other team's life hell, I think that's going to be a perfect spot for him to be in. And we look what we just saw with Kershaw last year. Like you said, not having that fear of a contract year on your back. Like Kershaw had a career year last year. Granted, he was playing with Bedard, but it goes both ways.
Though. Yeah,
for sure. So I don't know. I think like you got to give him a legit shot out of camp this year. I would put him with like Taylor Hall or someone. Like you got to put him with like legit speed and skill to give this kid a shot. Because I'm sorry, I cannot watch him. Like I know he has chemistry with Athanasiou, but we cannot rely on like the pivotal year in Reichel's development to be with a guy who was hurt for 6 months last year with a terrible groin injury. It's just this is not what we need to be doing in pivotal development years. And I think I mentioned it's like what I mentioned with Korchinski too. Like we're hitting prime years in these kids' development. We need to put more talent around them. And I think, like you said, Davidson's going to do that. He wants to make the lineup more competitive. He wants it to make it to where they earn their roster spots. And I think that's going to benefit everyone, including Reichel.
Yeah, you're talking about using his speed as a weapon. I know one of the biggest things Richardson talked with him about it as the year went on was trying to use his speed to drive the middle more. Like he kind of has a tendency to drive down the wing on the sides. And like, yes, he's playing wing, but they want him slashing down the middle to at least split the defense and like make the defense move because he's not going to be like an around the net kind of guy who's, banging in the crease and that sort of thing. But if he can be, an interior player rather than a perimeter player, at least in the neutral zone and across the blue line, they think that that'll make him a lot more dangerous. So I'm sure that'll be something he's hearing about this summer as well.
Yeah, it feels like Connor Bedard was Connor Bedard this year. Like you could put a bunch of bums around. Like everyone could have been bums around him. I feel he still could have put like 40, 50 points together. But Lucas Reichel, I felt like a lot of things went wrong. It's not as simple as this happened and this is why it was bad. It's one, it's the confidence, and two, I just don't think there were the proper line mates around. Like there's a lot of factors there, and kind of same thing with Kevin Korchinski. Like I mean, he's a 19-year-old defenseman, and obviously there were some things in his personal life, like his dad passed away. Like I can't imagine. Yeah, that couldn't have been easy. And then Arvid Soderblom, like it's so hard to be a goalie, and like goalies do have later development curves. But I think Davidson got the message and does know that he has to get more, maybe not like high end talent, but more guys that can push for a regular role and create more depth. So, I don't know if these discussions have been the main roster, but I want to get on to probably the biggest news, and at least in the Blackhawks world in the past week, them drafting second overall. And I mean, it would have been nice to get number 1 again in Celebrini. It's all right, but I mean, they have their pick of the litter at number 2, and there's a few guys there. Like I've mostly seen Ivan Demidov and Artem Levshunov. Seems like that's going to be the 2 guys that are there for them to pick. But then there's also names like Caden Lindstrom, and maybe they would have to look at someone like Anton Selyev, who is 6'7", and with the way they're building their defense, I mean, I would think they at least take a look at a guy like that. And there's a bunch of other guys, even Sam Dickinson, I would throw in there. So who do you think the Blackhawks should take with that number 2 pick?
Well, I haven't gotten to talk to Mike Donaghy yet. I'm hoping to do so soon. And honestly, I can't claim to be that big of a prospect expert myself. I'm spending all my time watching a 23-59 team all season. So there's not a lot of like free time to be watching the MHL or even that much of NCAA stuff. But yeah, from everything I've read, it sure sounds like Demidov and Levshinov are the two pretty like 99%. It's going to be one of those two. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of purpose in talking about anyone else. Again, I mean, yeah, they seem like two difference-making guys. I don't think the fact that they're likely not NHL players next year is a concern for the Hawks. Like, I mean, people talk about Demidov having 1 year left in his KHL deal as if that's a downside, but I don't think even if he had 0 years left, I don't think they would put him in the NHL next year, most likely. Like, they want to be patient with this. There's no reason to rush anybody. So I don't think that's really an issue at all, as long as they get his assurance that he's interested in signing a year from now. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue, but yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I have a lot more, reporting and research to do myself on this front, but it seems like it'll be one of those two guys, almost certainly.
Yeah, it feels like this is the first time since the 2019 draft when they had the third overall pick, because number 1 and number 2 were decided that year, and there was a debate. Oh, might they go like Byram Turcotte, and then of course they go Kirby Dach. So you never know with these things. But yeah, the last few years, like either they have had kind of like picks in the teens where it's like once it gets to that point of the draft, it's harder to tell. And then 2022 draft, we didn't even know they were going to pick in the first round until like the couple hours leading up to it. And then last year, we obviously all knew who was going first overall. So yeah, it's going to be, I think, a fun time to kind of debate who they go with at second overall. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, they do need another dynamic forward to play with Bedard, and I think Demidov could be that. But I wouldn't be mad if they went Levshinov to kind of finish out their defense. But I think this drafting, Davidson and this drafting team has earned the benefit of the doubt. Whoever they pick on number 2, I think is going to be, a top of the line impact player. So I'm looking forward to it, but also looking forward to, the debates of who they might go, and maybe if someone else does sneak in there. But I guess we're not going to find out till the day of the draft. So
yeah, that's a good point. We haven't really had a situation like this since 2019 where there's a couple guys to argue between. So that will be interesting. That will be fun to watch.
Oh, 2019. What a fun off season. But I think it really does get interesting though, because you can see the argument for both sides with the players. I think with Demidov, there's the obvious, like, you look at, I think I brought this up to one of our friends last weekend. Every cup winner since 2015 has had 2 elite forwards on the team. And the only team that hasn't is technically St. Louis. But even then, St. Louis had O'Reilly and Tarasenko, which is borderline elite. I'd argue O'Reilly was elite in that playoff run. So you can have that argument. You could also have the argument that every main team left in the playoffs right now probably has that dynamic number 1 defenseman, whether it's Cale Makar, whether it's Adam Fox, whether it's Miro Heiskanen, whether it's Alex Pietrangelo / Noah Hannafin / Shea Theodore. Oh, wait, they're gone. Never mind. Quinn Hughes, Evan Bouchard, the list goes on. Like, every team has this dynamic puck-moving defenseman. And while Korchinski is a very good defenseman, I think Pierce and I have had this talk. I think Korchinski benefits being a number 2 defenseman when they're a cup-winning team. I think that, if he could be that rover on the team, that's going to solidify that back end. And then you get a number 1 D-man talent on that back end to put with Vlasic or someone for the next God knows how many years. Like, there's a benefit to both sides of the argument, obviously. And it's just interesting to see which side people are already falling on, because we have 2 months to go. Like, you're going to see people flip-flop on their opinions all the time. And I just think it's funny that people are sticking their flag in the sand in May when we have another 6 or 7 weeks of this. So it's going to be fun for sure.
I always find it funny how opinionated people are about prospects that they probably have not watched or barely watched. I get it more in basketball and hockey, where a lot of people have been watching these guys in college, but like, who has been really watching Ivan Demidov other than maybe his highlights on YouTube? Like, it just, yeah. Okay. Well,
I'm joking. I have watched it. I watched a decent amount of Demidov tape back in like October and November, and then he got hurt for a bit, and then I had life stuff catch up. So I've only seen a little bit of him, but haven't seen much Levshinov. I gotta watch more tape of him for sure. The guy
Well,
I
I think
really liked was Lindstrom because I thought we were going to drop, but we were right too. So I think Lindstrom's out of the equation now.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a third candidate, like it's probably him, but that seems pretty unlikely. And yeah, I mean, there are certainly people who have, and like you guys are probably a bit more tuned in than the average fan, so credit to you. But I think a lot of the people who are arguing vehemently about this are maybe not not really judging it off of too much. It's just fun to have an opinion. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter too much what anyone thinks other than Kyle Davidson.
Exactly.
But it will be fun to see Twitter go to war a little bit because as we were talking about, it's been a few years since there's been an opportunity for this.
Oh, and let's not pretend like Chicago sports doesn't jump at the throat of this. We just went through this with Bears Twitter for 4 months with the Justin Fields, Caleb Williams. Still going on, even though that debate has already been settled.
He literally got drafted.
But can't never deny Chicago sports passion. That's for sure. Going on to, I guess, pick 20, because I think depending on what the Hawks do with the second pick, obviously, it's really going to gauge how they're going to draft the rest of the way through. Because I think if you take let's say they draft Artem Levshunov second overall, they go defenseman. Is there a world where they maybe potentially try to trade up and get one of those secondary forwards in this class, or maybe vice versa, try to get one of the defensemen in this class because it is a deep defenseman class as well? Because they do have a plethora of picks, and I like to make this point that not every prospect's going to play for you in the NHL. You got to use these picks to accumulate, and whether it's a player or whether it's moving up. Do you see that as something that could potentially be happening, or do you think they're going to probably stay deadlocked at 20?
I definitely think that's possible. I mean, we know firsthand that they tried to do it last year to get Oliver Moore. Davidson said immediately afterward that they had been calling every team for the past, I don't know how
that
many
video
picks
clip was so funny to watch. He's like, "Come on, fuck it, let's go. We got him."
Trying to move up. So, I mean, we know he's from pretty much the same spot last year. He tried to do that. And I imagine they will try to do it again this year, especially if someone they like starts falling a little bit and becomes more attainable. And as you said, I mean, they have 3 second-round picks. They have 2 third-round picks, I believe. So they have a lot of draft capital, and they already have so many prospects in the system that they do become increasingly expendable every year. I mean, you can only have so many guys in the reserve list. You can only have so many guys under contract eventually. So I think it would make sense if you can find a taker at a reasonable price to trade up. The issue is that everybody wants to trade up and not many people want to trade down. So there's kind of a market imbalance with that just in any sport with any team.
Takes two to
it's about
tango.
finding someone willing to trade down. But I think they'll certainly try. I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't, honestly.
For sure. Yeah. Because I don't know. I think Pierce and I have, threw ideas across at each other of what they could do with those 2 picks. And, if they take a Demidov, I would very much like if they could trade up and get one of those, I want to say the top 7 defensemen are very solid in this draft.
Kind of that second tier. Yeah, like maybe like a Yakimchuk or I don't know if Peric would be there, but yeah, kind of that grouping of defensemen.
Oh yeah, if they could go up and get Yakimchuk, I think I've said to Pierce for months, that just screams Kyle Davidson, 6'2" WHL right-handed defenseman that can skate. That's right up his alley. And then vice versa, there's guys like Consta Helenis. He's a very skilled Finnish winger. If he starts dropping, I could see Davidson trading up from it's going to be a draft where they're going to have the luxury of being flexible, which I don't think they've had the last 2 drafts, even though Davidson was extremely flexible in 2022. But I think it's nice to know that he can either do that or sit on his hands and still get his guy potentially like he did last year. So that's always good to know for sure.
Yeah, I don't think any trades happened at the draft last year, so maybe
First
them
time
being at the
since
Sphere,
2007.
yeah, maybe them being at the Sphere will change some things. Maybe they'll just get crazy.
I'm fascinated to see just how that'll work from a logistics standpoint, just hosting the draft. I haven't been in the Sphere before, and I have really no mental picture what the setup is going to be or what that's going to look like. I mean, it's also going to be scorching hot, I'm sure, and
yeah,
as Nashville was last year. And that's
man,
2 things that'll be similar is alcohol and very hot, but it'll be interesting what the setup is. I'm intrigued to see that.
I can't wait to see the zoomed in picture of Kyle Davidson while they're on the clock on the sphere. It's just going to be like
It's
his
all
face
wrapped,
extremely
wrapped
close.
around. That's all you see is just his face.
We're going to be able to like see the sweat glands on his head because the camera's going to be so close on him. Or like the sphere's just so elongated. Like,
I mean,
it's
not to
gonna be
be
crazy.
rude, but there's worse GMs we could look at than Kyle Davidson when it comes to that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Pierce. Sorry.
I don't know if you had anything else to Dylan, but
Nope.
we were kind of talking about earlier that there's going to be debates with who the Blackhawks pick on number 2. This is more a league wide debate of that's probably going to happen until I'm pretty sure the NHL awards are a couple days before the draft. What are your thoughts on Bedard versus Faber? Because obviously, being Blackhawks fans, we're going to choose Connor Bedard, and not to diminish what Brock Faber has done, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. Like, I don't know if you're able to give like away who you voted on your ballots, but I mean, I guess
Okay.
I guess best give us who do you think would win that, I suppose.
I mean, I'm technically not allowed to say that, but I don't think it'll be too hard to guess based on my answer to this question. But I mean, Bedard's going to win. Like, I don't think you can even bet on this anymore. Even at the peak of the Faber hype in late March or whenever that was, I think Bedard was still like minus 800 or something. And that's really what matters. It's not the loud, wild fans on Twitter. And I think that line doesn't even exist anymore. So, I mean, Bedard's going to win. I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if he didn't. Faber kind of dropped off a little bit the last few months of the year and isn't really the analytics darling he was made out to be. I mean, he had a great rookie season, no doubt, but I don't think it's really going to be that close when we see the final voting.
I feel you're totally right. I feel I was just being gaslit by like the echo chamber on Twitter, but I felt like there were like especially Michael Russo of who covers the Wild. Like it feels like he was going hard for Brock Faber, but I'm like, no, this can't be right. Yeah, he might not get unanimous, but I think at the end of the day, most like NHL voters are going to come to their senses, and I think Bedard is going to win that quite handily. So I was just curious to hear that.
I also laughed because you said minus 800, and I thought you were joking about Bedard's plus minus. I did that celebration. I was like, that's funny. And then I realized you meant the betting odds. My bad.
Yeah, well, I'm sure plenty of Wild fans made that joke as well. But, I mean, what I thought was interesting was around that time at the peak of the Faber hype, Greg Wyshynski had a story where he polls voters, and Faber, I think, won.
I think that was another one I was thinking of.
Yeah, that was surprising to me. But then, and I have participated in that before. I wasn't one of the people he was polling this year. But I think it does tend to be maybe more like social media-y kind of people that he's polling. I mean, that's how he reached out to me, was through Twitter DM, and I think that's probably how he finds everyone to participate in it. And then the voters who are plugged in on Twitter like that are probably more likely to be Faber voters than just the overall like 350 or whatever voters, that some of which are older and some of which are not really, as plugged in that, and they're just going based on what they see and based on honestly some reputation too. And so I think even at that time that was probably a bit of sampling bias. But I think even if you polled those same people that Wyshynski polled, now a month and a half later, I think Bedard would win handily, and I think he's going to win handily in the overall vote.
And it's nothing against Brock Faber. I think he was tasked to be a number one defenseman at 21 years old, playing 26, 27 minutes a night. And those are not easy minutes on the Wild. Like, you're getting put up against top competition every night. And, I do think the 82 game schedule did get to him towards the end. Like, this is a player who's never played that much hockey in his life. And I think we need to, I feel like this happens a lot with some college hockey players where we all get really hyped about them coming to the league. And then it's like, these guys have never played over 50 games in a season. And if it was in junior. It was before junior. It was when they were in high school. Like, they have to get used to the 82 game regimen and get used to, you're playing 4 times a week normally. And I think guys like Logan Cooley, you saw the growing pains a little bit this year. Injuries kind of derailed Adam Fantilli's rookie year, but I think that happened with Faber too towards the end, especially when, the microscope was getting put on them, and they were, the sticks were getting a little tighter because they were in the playoff hunt for a little bit. And I think it's going to benefit him in the long run, like it benefited Bedard going through the growing pains. And it's unfortunate that we can't just enjoy this debate or enjoy two great rookies. We have to pick it's like the Davidoff Levchinov thing. You got to pick a side. You got to you always got to pick a side. Always got to plant your irrelevant opinion in the sand. But it's going to be a fun rivalry to watch for the next couple of years for sure, especially since they're both in the same division, and it's not like the Hawks and the Wild are, buddy. Like that's still, those teams still don't like each other. Like it was very well proven in all the games they played this year. So it's gonna be fun to watch for sure.
And I know Bedard like heard at least a little bit of that noise. Like I don't think he's going on Twitter and be like, "Oh, I can't believe they chose Brock Faber over me in the polls." But like I'm pretty sure he got it through the grapevine that Brock Faber's getting some hype, and I would think the other way around too with Brock Faber. So like a nice friendly competition. I felt if Alex Vlasic was Calder eligible this year, that would have been a more fascinating race to watch between him and Faber. Though I don't think Vlasic put up quite the offense that Faber did. But yeah, I don't know if you have any questions to add, Dylan, or I have like maybe one more to ask. But
I guess just when it comes to maybe just expectations for next year. I know you said like 30 wins would be like a good placeholder for this team to be in if we're looking in this time next year. Just based on what you're hearing from Davidson in the closing interviews, and like, so I know Seth Jones was coming out saying like he's tired of this and not losing culture, but just get your teeth kicked in every night almost.
And
what
there
do you
being
think
no
is
stability with like guys like having 1-2, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you think is a realistic expectation for next season?
Yeah, I think that 30 win thing, like I said, I feel like if you can improve by 8 wins a year, that'd be like the best possible like improvement trajectory. Like that's the optimum. If they go from 23 this year to 31 next year, 39 the following year, and maybe, hang around in the bubble for a while and then break through to 45, 46, 47 the following year and make the playoffs in 2026, 27. Like, I think that's really the best rate you can ask for. And is that going to happen? Like that, I'm not sure. I mean, that's pretty optimistic, I would say. But I think if everything goes according to plan, that's maybe a model you can gauge it off of as we move forward. So, yeah, I think if they win 30 games or so next year, that's a solid enough amount of improvement that you can label that a successful season. And yeah, I mean, is Foligno and Seth going to like it? I mean, maybe not. They're talking about wanting to make the playoffs next year. And I understand that's just the pro athlete mentality. And
I do like to hear that though, like that they have high expectations for themselves at least. Like, oh, we might be okay next year. Like we might win a few more games. So
yeah, I mean, it's something I've talked to Connor Murphy about before. Like you have to go into every game just believing wholeheartedly you're going to win, because if you don't, you're just going to get destroyed, not only on the scoreboard, but just kind of physically as well. Like you have to have that just complete belief. And so that's what makes it so difficult to be in a team like this, where you go into every night believing that, and then almost every night you fall short of expectations, and then you still have to build that belief up again 24 or 48 hours later and do it all over again. Like it's just a constant cycle of disappointment that you like cannot allow yourself to escape. Like you can't adjust your expectations. So I find it interesting from a psychological standpoint. And I can get why that'd be really exhausting for guys who've been in this team the past few years. And I'm sure it'll be that way again next year. Hopefully they'll be able to, have a little bit more success and point to that and see the upward trajectory starting. But yeah, I think from the outside, like they're probably not going to be, anywhere near the bubble or anything like that, but you would like to see them not be in the bottom 3 or bottom 5 even again. Like that would, if they can get out of that tier, out of the Sharks tier, like that's probably a win.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's the thing with sports. It's never linear. Like there's always going to be peaks and valleys when you don't want there to be. Like they've done the easy part, stripping it down to the studs, getting rid of like all the players from the past, getting draft picks and prospects and all that stuff. And now it's climbing back up the mountain. Like it's going to get steeper and steeper. Like yeah, you can get it's to 30 wins, but making up like 7-8 wins every year is so hard to do. So but overall, I can't speak for everyone or even Dylan, but I feel still quite optimistic about the future, like all the prospects they have and what kind of players they've been valuing and how, Davidson has been very, hasn't gone after, any contract that's more than 2 years. That's like past Bedard's ELC. Like they're preaching patience and yeah, there's some growing pains, but all in all, I still think there's a lot to look forward to for the future. So
I do have one last question, and this is just a prediction. I want you to shot in the dark. What do you think Bedard's point total is next year? Let's say he plays a full 82. Let's say he plays a full 82. What do you think is his stat line next year?
I think it'll depend a little bit on if they get another guy to play with him, like who that top 6 forward addition is. But I think it's reasonable that he would be at a point per game. I mean, he wasn't too far off that this year. It was like 61 and 68 or something like that. And so I think over 82, I mean, if he gets to 82, that's probably a reasonable rate of improvement. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than that. Now the odds are he probably doesn't play 82. Like that's hard to do. Not many players do, but I think it's a reasonable expectation for him to be at a point per game or even slightly higher next year.
For sure. Me personally, I think his goal total is going to go up. I think he's going to watch a lot of film on places where he could have, because it's crazy to say Connor Bedard could shoot the puck more, but he can't. It's just, it is the reality. And I think he's going to have that awakening at some point.
I think he hits 30 next year, at least.
Same here.
Yeah. I think honestly, he was, if anything, a little unlucky in terms of the shooting total.
Scary to
like
think.
he was at like 12% or something shooting percentage. And I mean, that's above league average, but not that much above league average. And I think you compare his shot to league average and it's way above average. So yeah, I think his shooting percentage will probably increase. So I think I think a lot of that improvement probably will be on the goal side.
And he had like 3 or 4 goals taken away, I'm pretty sure.
All
that's
highlight
true.
reels
Yeah.
too. Just so happened
Yeah,
every
that's a
time
good
this guy
point.
had a goal taken away, it was a banger. Oh my god!
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, I guess before we wrap it up, I have one more question. What were some of your favorite players to interview this year? Because we kind of touched on it earlier, like Connor Bedard. Like, I still feel like once he gets more comfortable, like I feel he's got more personality to show. But then I think of when I was 18 and 19 years old, kind of at that age, I was boring too. So I'm not gonna be like, oh, he has no personality. He's so boring. Like he's still a child figuring everything out. So I will give him pass there. But I felt like reading articles from you guys, or whether that's Scott Powers or Mark Lazar, it seemed like there were a lot of interesting guys on the team, and overall the vibes were good, even despite all the losing. Like, what were some of your favorite players to interview this year? Favorite quotes, I guess.
Well, I'm sure I've talked about Dickinson last year, probably, because he was just as fascinating last year as this year. But it was cool to see him emerge as one of the key players in the team, and be able to continue talking to him, because he is just he's just brilliant. I mean, like, if he wasn't a hockey player, he would be doing something very interesting and successful with his life. And I think after hockey, you probably will too. I had a conversation with him on the island. When was that? Like the April 1st-ish, about face-offs, and we ended up going for like 15 minutes just about face-off minutia. And it's just fascinating to hear him break things down. I'll do a bad job if I try to rehash what he said. You can go Google and read the story if you want. That'll probably be better to just read his own quotes. But just talking about how, like, sometimes he'll even intentionally he didn't say intentionally, but like sort of intentionally lose faceoffs just to kind of rope-a-dope somebody, so that when it comes to a really big faceoff, they'll expect him to do one thing and he can do something else and surprise them. And like that's just wild to hear about. I never really realized that was a thing. So talking to Dickinson's always fascinating. Mrazek is such a character. Like he's always makes me laugh. He's just always doing something. He's kind of like a big child in a way. He's such a sense of humor and so lighthearted, and he's a little bit aloof in like the most endearing way. So I always enjoy talking to him. And Vlasic too, I mentioned him earlier. I mean, he's really interesting to talk to too, and just such a down-to-earth guy. And I love how open he was about how successful he was. He'd be like, yeah, I thought I did a pretty damn good job today.
He did.
Stuff like that. So I appreciated his honesty with that, and talking to him about like his celiac disease was one of my more interesting stories of the year. I enjoyed him opening up about that. And honestly, there are a lot of guys who are really interesting. Foligno, I'm sure his videos and quotes were all over the internet, so I don't think that's any surprise that he's great to talk to. And Joey Anderson, really nice guy. Jacob Megna, like obviously maybe got a little frustrating from the outside, but his story of coming back to Chicago where he grew up and like just getting to reunite with his high school friends, it was cool. I enjoyed doing a story about that. And honestly, most of the players on the team were good interviews, and I appreciated them being so open about things and having a pretty good attitude when we were in there for interviews, even though they were losing almost every game. So even Bedard, like, yeah, he's not really the most interesting guy, and he's a little bit closed off in interviews, but he's very polite, he's friendly, and he was very available. Like, he never really turned down an interview request. He was sitting at his stall all the time. So I appreciated him being willing to answer questions so much, even though it maybe wasn't the most interesting a lot of the time.
All right, Srini, I don't know if you got anything else to add, or we can wrap this up, I think.
No, that's all I got. We really appreciate you coming on again. It's always super informative to hear your experiences throughout the season and, you know, give us a little insight on maybe how the off season's going. We always appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a fun time. Hope you guys are enjoying the off season so far as well.
Yeah, we're enjoying the playoffs. Oh, and like just a quick, who do you think wins Cup this year?
I predicted Dallas before the year started, and they haven't given me much reason to change that prediction. But I think Rangers. Like it, I just don't know if anyone's beating that team right now the way they're playing. It's been kind of razor thin margins every game against the Hurricanes, and like at this point I wouldn't be that shocked if the Canes came back. But I think if the Rangers get past them, like I don't know who's beating them with the way Shesterkin's playing, the way Trocheck's playing, and then also having Panarin and Fox, two of the best players in the world at their positions. So, I think I'd probably go with a Dallas Rangers final at least.
All right, yeah, we'll let you go. Thanks for code on, Ben. Maybe we can bump into you at the Sphere in Vegas soon. But yeah, thanks for coming on. We always appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thank you.